Hello and welcome. Our guest this week on Tête-à-Tête is Mykhailo Podolyak. He's a senior advisor to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, and he joins us from Kiev. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Podolyak.
Greetings.
After a brutal meeting at the White House last week, the suspension of U.S. military aid to Ukraine, the U.S. President Donald Trump, in his State of the Union speech to Congress, said he had been told by President Zelensky that he was ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible. Donald Trump, he also said the Russians were okay with it. And this Wednesday, the Kremlin called this development positive. Does this mean that there will indeed soon be peace talks with President Zelensky, President Trump, and President Putin?
It's going to be soon. We are going to have a constructive discussion with the President of the United States, because the President of Ukraine is very pragmatic. He understands that we have to work in triangle, Europe, USA, and Ukraine. This will happen, and we see already that we are already returning to this constructive dialogue, and I think we are going to find the decision. Talking about Russia, I would like to stress again that the Russian Federation, it is not interested in the real negotiation, is not interested in ceasefire. But I think we can find the instrument of pressure on Russia, and thus we can really sit down around the balanced table of negotiation.
Does this mean that you have received guarantees from the U.S. that Ukraine will indeed be at the table, and so will Europe, because the assumption was that this would be a deal between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump only?
Okay, let's be objective. It is impossible to finish war on the European continent without the presence of Europe. Besides that, Europe also, thanks to Mr. Macron, it's more independent, and Europe has to be present on this negotiation table, and Ukraine as well, because the war is waged on the territory of Ukraine, on the territory of Europe. And thirdly, Europe as a partner of Ukraine is as important as the United States. So if we really wanted to finish this war, we have to understand very clearly that only configuration that Mr. Zelensky said, so it has to be USA, European Union, representatives of Ukraine, and Ukraine on one side, on the other side, Russia. Only this way we can really talk about finish and stop this war.
Before real peace negotiation, there is discussion about a truce in missile, drone strikes, as well as maritime operations. The French president talked about it. Volodymyr Zelensky talked about it. How realistic is a truce in the coming days?
I like the initiative that they were very thought through, and logistics are there. Mr. Starmer, Mr. Macron talked about it. Maybe we have to have peacekeeping truce, maybe with the assistance of the United States as well. This is the very realistic scenario, absolutely realistic, and Ukraine is ready to talk about it with our partners about it. The issue isn't something different, and I would like you to understand that without pressure instruments, Russia won't be interested in stopping any fire, independently if it's going to be in the air or at the sea. We shouldn't forget that the basic instruments, Russia, that's the mass strikes on the civil infrastructures, missiles and drones on the civil infrastructure of the energetic infrastructure. There are emotional pressures also on the countries, not only Ukraine, but Europe. That's why we need to find out what is the best pressure on Russia. Only then we can have a real negotiation. Right now, we don't see that Russia is interested in it.
The U.S. announced a suspension of military aid. There were indications that this minerals deal that was supposed to be signed last week before the clash in the White House will be signed. Are you demanding, in exchange for signing this deal, that the U.S. lifts the suspension of military aid to Ukraine?
Okay, first of all, let's be frank. On the table of negotiation, with the United States, we have there is still this framework agreement on minerals. Also, there are also proposals to continue military aid to Ukraine. When we are talking about the suspension of certain programs, we have to talk about what kind of programs will be suspended. We have different programs. There are presidential programs that could be suspended. There are programs that were voted on in the Congress. It's a completely different story. We have to know how many money funds Ukraine already used from these programs. We are ready to talk about Mr. Trump and some other programs and projects to support Ukraine. There are also some other things. Don't forget that today we see there is a growing possibility to manufacture military weaponry in the European countries. Also, Ukraine has their own defense industry growing. First of all, we can produce our own drones and missiles. That's why we would like to firstly talk with our partners in the US about all this, but also about agreement on mineral. I think that's still on the table, and I am sure they are going to talk about in the near future.
Right, but does this mean that Ukraine, knowing that it needs the U.S. Military, financial, diplomatic support, is now ready to negotiate, even if it means territorial concessions and even if it means not clear security guarantees?
Ukraine is ready to have negotiations. Ukraine understands very well the motives of the Russian Federation and that Russia is not really ready for real negotiation. Ukraine has now completely different relation with our European partners. That's practically a very partners relation. And Ukraine is very interested as well that Europe will be independent and their own military enhancement. Exactly, Ukraine is completely ready for very good cooperation in any format with the United States, taking into account also the policy that Mr. Trump has. We understand the motives. We understand that he wants to have the quick results and everything that linked to the war in the Eastern Europe. But there are some realities, and we are going to talk about these realities with our partners. First, without pressure of Russia on Russia, nothing will happen. Without building up our own defense in Europe, nothing will happen. And thirdly, Ukraine to maximum is interested in efficiently finishing this war and also in growing up the defense capabilities in Europe.
Right, but this will mean territorial concessions. The Russians are not going to give back the territories they control, and this is something that Ukraine will be forced to accept, however difficult that may be for you.
Any negotiation positions is with regard to the efficient negotiation. Who and what going to talk, what instruments going to be used, because the Russian Federation is also a lot of stress on their own economy. They are losing their own resources. So when correct pressure instruments will be used, and I am repeating that, if we're going to go back to the international law as the basis of this, then we can have an efficient and effective negotiation. This is just about time when we finally can go back to the final just deal in this war. Please understand, if Russia won't be responsible for this aggression, for this war, if Russia is not going to finance the consequences of this war, we're talking about the legal sense and the financial levels, it will mean that Russia will continue its expansion on the European continent, because the war, it's the only instrument that is convenient for the Russian Federation. They don't have any other instruments. Again, I will summarize. Negotiations are very important, but we need to synchronize our positions with European countries, with the United States, and also understanding that Europe has to receive their own security guarantees and also not have the expansion from the Russian Federation, the threat of expansion from the Russian Federation.
As a conclusion, there was the humiliation in the White House of Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump calling him a dictator, other top Republicans saying he needs to go, we can't really talk to him. Can trust be rebuilt between President Zelensky and President Trump?
We live with you in the informational times when you use quite often the provocative statements to attract attention to the maximum of the people. This motivation, this position is completely clear to me. Okay, let's talk about Mr. Zelensky. Of course, we don't have any dictators in Ukraine. We don't have any non-democratic leaders because we are a classic democracy. When we have very competitive policy, we have freedom of speech, and we have competitive elections. It's already the sixth president of Ukraine during our independence. We have very good elections to the parliament, etc. So we are quite calm when we listen to these statements. We have a practically pragmatic approach to our relation. Also, I would like to summarize. For the United States, it's very convenient to have strong Europe, even though when we are talking about the global influence, also it's good to have the strong Ukraine and invest to Europe, because it's going to be completely different level of global domination, even for the United States. They are going to regain the same position that Mr. Trump wanted to have. They wanted to be the global leader.
Mykhailo Podolyak, I want to thank you very much for being our guest here on France 24 from Kiev in Ukraine, and thank you for watching this interview.